Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the lead up to the outbreak of World War I. Now, big thing about it, we left off in class talking about the growth of Pan-Slavism, the growing tensions between these countries. Russians are mad at the Austrians because the Austrians are claiming all this land and all these Slavic territories. And then they manage to make somebody so mad, i.e. the Serbians, that the Serbians are going to decide to actually finance a very small group of young men known as Young Bosnia to go and destroy the life of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, we spent a little bit of time in class talking about who Archduke Franz Ferdinand is, talked a little bit about how he was on a parade in Sarajevo on June 28th, 1914, when he was actually on a parade. He was kissing babies and shaking hands and trying to make the Austrians look good, right? So he was on a parade in Bosnia, but he was shot by a bunch of Serbians, right? But the Serbians didn't even call themselves Serbians. They called themselves Young Bosnians because all Serbians live in Serbia. Now, I know that this stuff can be kind of confusing, but again, welcome to European history. It's all confusing. Cultural demographics and where they're located during the early 20th century is going to be very different all the time. Now, going into it though, okay? So we left off in the part of the story where the original plan actually outlined by this guy and 5 of his friends, Gavrilo Princip and 5 of his friends, was to actually throw a grenade at the moving motorcade of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? The idea is that, of course, while Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie were traveling amidst this parade in Sarajevo on June 28th, he was going to actually have a grenade dunked inside of this convertible, right? 5 of the guys were supposed to slow down the crowd, back them up, and then slow the car down on top of a bridge in Sarajevo. And then one guy was supposed to emerge out of the crowd with a grenade and dunk it in there. But he freaked out and he Kobe'd it instead of Michael Jordaning it, all right? And so he actually missed, okay? He missed the car completely. The grenade actually rolled over into the crowd and actually injured several bystanders, right? Now, you would think at this moment Archduke Franz Ferdinand would probably sit back and be like, someone just tried to kill me. Maybe I'll go home. Well, he doesn't, all right? So he doesn't go home, right? As the second in line, or the next in line for the Austrian throne with his ailing uncle, Franz Joseph. Not ailing, he's just old, right? So he's about in his 80s by that point. With his old uncle still on the throne, you'd think the guy that's supposed to be next up in line would have just kind of fled and done his own thing and been like, man, they tried to kill me. I don't want to have an Alexander II Tsar of Russia situation on my hands, or my aunt who was stabbed to death by Italian anarchists with a sharpened up file. Don't really want that on my hands. So I'll just go home. But he doesn't do that. He actually goes to the hospital and visits the people injured by the blast, and then he continues the parade, right? He actually continues the parade itself. Now, the interesting thing about it is, as you can see, he's riding in a car, right? So the parade continued, and he was supposed to take a right down this one road. But the problem was that there was actually an early car accident down that road that he was supposed to go down. Because, think about it, y'all. Early cars, people haven't had experience driving them, there's going to be car accidents, you know what I mean? So the parade had to take a detour. The parade actually had to go up a block and then turn right on the next street. And when he actually turned right down that street, the motorcade passed in front of a small cafe. Very European, a small cafe, where a young man was drinking a cup of coffee and eating a sandwich. And that man's name was Gavrilo Princip. One of the assassins was sitting at a random cafe down from the parade route, where literally the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's car would pass in front of it. And at that moment, he put down his food, he put down his cup of coffee, he jumped up and ran up to the car, and he shot both of them, his wife Sophie and the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Killed both of them, right? Shot them and was immediately arrested after the fact, right? Immediately arrested and then taken to a very small prison camp outside of Austria known as Terezin, which would later on in World War II be turned into a concentration camp. One of the creepiest ones actually out there. He lived out the rest of his days in imprisonment, where he would eventually lose his arm from 21 from tuberculosis and then die from a prison infection. Now, the thing about it, though, is Gavrilo Princip had fired the shot that would lead to the beginning of World War I. Now, the thing about it is that this war could have been avoided so easily still. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, after he was shot in Sarajevo and after his wife was shot as well, this is a picture of their actual funeral together, and of course Sophie's casket is actually laid about a foot shorter than Archduke Franz Ferdinand because she was such a commoner and stuff like that, and nobody liked her because she wasn't of nobility and blah, 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 blah. But we talked about that in class. One last little kind of thing really screwed up, just punch in the gut to Franz Ferdinand from his uncle and the nobles of Austria, was mounting his dead wife's casket about 6 to 7 or 8 inches, or about a foot lower than actual Franz Ferdinand's casket, because she was a noble. But the thing about it that we need to understand is then you won't believe what happened after that. A lot of teachers kind of teach this as, and then immediately Europe went to war. That's not true, all right? So, like, actually, it took over a month for them to go to war because most of the leaders went on vacation, all right? So now when we're actually looking at this, you need to understand that basically what ended up happening is most of the leaders of, like, World War I countries, let me look at this. Wilhelm II vacation assassination. All right, so now, well, he doesn't get assassinated on his, like, actual vacation. But what ends up happening is July is a very, very big month for most of the, assassination. So yeah, for most of the leaders of Europe to go on vacation. And so Kaiser Wilhelm was planning on going on this cruise right here. And Kaiser Wilhelm, being the leader of Germany, was supposed to go on a big vacation where he was going to be unreachable for over 3 weeks, right? So the biggest thing that does end up happening is that means that who is actually going to be left in charge to determine who did what, who caused what, why our guy was shot, and what's going to happen next. Well, the thing about it is, it's going to be ambassadors, right? A lot of different German ambassadors, Austrian ambassadors, Russian ambassadors, Serbian ambassadors are going to start getting in rooms together to try and figure out who is to blame for this assassination, instead of just simply blaming it on a terrorist organization like the Black Hand that gave money to young Bosnia to carry out this assassination and calling a spade, they began to blame it on one another, right? They began to blame it on one another, and Austria wanted to blame Serbia. But the thing about it is that Serbia is supported by a very large other Slavic nation known as Russia, right? So this is where we get into our blank check crisis, okay? So the thing about it is, depending on who you ask on how to spell this, the blank check, when you spell it in English, is spelled C-H-E-C-K. When you spell it actually in European, well, not European, it's not a language. Most Europeans, though, spell it C-H-E-Q-U-E, right? Like, so, Czechwa. Like, now, but the thing about it is, it's all the same thing, okay? What we're now getting into is a metaphorical crisis, okay? A metaphor and a big crisis. So the thing about it is that Europe doesn't actually declare war on each other until late July, early August. Like, for example, Britain declares war on Germany in this war on August the 4th. And then actually Germany declares war on France on August the 1st. And then all this other crazy stuff kind of goes down. But what happened for that entire month? Well, all these people were meeting in these rooms trying to figure out what's going down. Now, we could talk about this for days. We could talk about it for days, or you could read this book right here sometime if you want to. It's called The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. It's actually a Pulitzer Prize-winning book about the start of World War I, if any of you are actually so inclined or interested in reading it. The Tuttles of the World, you might want to pick it up one day. It's considered like one of the seminal tomes of the start of World War I. Now, the thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, is you got to understand is that month of July between the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and the beginning of the war is going to be a crucial time where countries could have avoided this, right? They could have avoided it 100 different ways, okay? Well, the thing about it is the July crisis is a period of time when Austria issued about 10 demands to Serbia, right? 10 demands saying, comply with these things or we are going to invade you, right? And so the thing is that the Austrians are a little cocky right now. It's because they have the Germans at their back, right? The Germans actually, before Kaiser Wilhelm left for his vacation, before the demands were actually issued to Serbia by Austria, starting the July crisis, the month-long terrible time where we're about to go to war. Well, the thing about it is that basically Kaiser Wilhelm said, no matter what you decide to do, you have Germany's full support. That is what the blank check is. Listen to me carefully. No matter what you decide to do, you will have Germany's full support, okay? That is the metaphor in this situation. If somebody handed you a blank check, it means you could fill it out for whatever amount of money you so chose, right? So the thing about that is that that's a very aggressive thing to do, because I could fill it out for $1 or I could fill it out for $1 million, right? The scary part about this is that it gave Austria a lot of confidence going into these negotiations, and is going to lead them to being much more aggressive with Serbia. So they issued those 10 demands. The Serbs actually were going to give in to 9 out of the 10 of them, but they couldn't give in to the 10th one. And the 10th one required them actually to allow Austrian soldiers to enact martial law inside of their country. And they just weren't having it, right? Now, the crazy part about it is Austria didn't want to go to war. A bunch of people didn't go to war, particularly more than anybody else. Kaiser Wilhelm didn't want to go to war. But again, he was unreachable for about 3 weeks because he was on vacation. So is Franz Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand's dead. He's on a permanent vacation. So is Franz Joseph. Nicholas II is also in St. Petersburg, very, very far away. And most of the other leaders of these European countries are on vacation as well, because July is just a time that you go out of town, right? Now, the thing about it that you need to understand as well is that when Austria issued these 10 demands to Serbia, they knew that they couldn't comply, and there was a lot of back and forth between these officers. But one thing that is going to happen is that Russia, out of fear of things going down and to try and intimidate Austria, is going to begin begin to mobilize its military. Now, what mobilization means is preparing it for war. Austria gets real freaked out because it's going to take them at least 3 weeks to get their entire army ready, which means it won't be ready until mid-August, and their army isn't even that good. And so what ends up happening is Kaiser Wilhelm comes back from his vacation, and he starts writing letters between him and the Tsar of Russia at the time, Nicholas II, trying to avoid the war completely. But things get bungled. Things get bungled real bad, and what ends up happening is that the Russians refuse to not mobilize their military. They place it on the borders of Austria and Germany, and then Austria, like an idiot, decided to go off and declare war on Serbia on July 28th, right? Now, the thing about it is that Germany has already guaranteed Austria their support, okay? And like I said, you could read this book right here and know that there was a bunch of different stuff that went down. Actually, at one point, the Russian ambassador, when he met the Austrian ambassador in Serbia to try and keep this war from happening, dude died of a heart attack in the middle of dinner, right? Which is absolutely wild. So the thing about it, though, is that everybody was like, oh, did they poison him? And blah, 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 blah. But we're not going to talk about all that stuff. The biggest thing you need to know is that this could have been avoided, right? This could have been avoided, but everything just kind of got bungled, and people were like, oh, what about this? Or what if we do this? And there was a lot of pride involved and things like that. But Austria is going to declare war on Serbia on July 28th, thinking that they might be able to get in there and do a real quick battle, knock Serbia out before Russia can even finish mobilizing. Problem is that in reaction to the July 28th declaration of war on Serbia, Russia declares war on Austria. Germany then declares war on Russia, okay? Two cousins are about to go to war, Kaiser Wilhelm II and Nicholas II, who were just exchanging letters before this and calling each other Willie and Nicky because literally they were that close, right? So Germany declared war on Russia after repeated attempts to try and avoid this war. Now, then something weird is going to go down. Germany then declares war on France on August 3rd, right? So, why would they do this? Why would Germany just turn around and be like, smack, and then just, immediately declare war on France? A lot of it has to do with a plan that they had come up with a long time before. Now, I told you when we talked about militarism and the creation of the dreadnought and the Anglo-German arms race and all that stuff leading up to this war, that a lot of people had began to come up with plans, right? Big, big, grand plans on what they would do should a war actually explode in Europe and a great war would actually happen, right? And it's happening, right? It's going down now because Russia is about to attack Germany in the east, and Germany's getting real freaked out because they got to attack France in the west. And just like so many of you understood it so well in class the other day, because you're not trying to memorize this stuff, you're trying to critically think with it, which I find mind-blowing every day with this group. I think we're going to have at least a 70% passage rating on this AV test. I'm so excited for y'all to do well. And by the way, you should be studying by now, right? Start going through some old Heimler videos. Elizabeth Hamilton's already been making the warm-up Quizlets. I'm going to start making key terms and key people Quizlets and start posting them on Google Classroom. By the way, speaking of as well, I'm going to post a DBQ that if you want to practice, you can totally write it. And I would suggest, okay, go into it blind. Go into it blind and just try to write it. See how you can do. And when you bring it back from break, if you want to, I'll grade it for you, okay? And we'll have a live grading one-on-one, all right? So the big thing about it, though, is going into it, because we need to make sure we understand it, not just memorize it. Why would Germany go off and declare war with France when you could have hopefully kept this thing localized on one side? Well, the thing about it is, as the alliance systems continue to tumble down, France, as you should already know, is in the triple entente with Russia. So Germany knows France will declare war on them once they declare war on Russia. So it only took 2 days for them to turn around and try and smack France in the face. Well, the plan was actually designed by this guy named Arthur von Schlieffen, right? Schlieffen was a German military commander, a general in the German army. Funky thing about it is he's been dead since about 1897, right? So the thing is then why are we attacking France using a guy that's dead's plan? Well, because Arthur von Schlieffen was smart, right? Arthur von Schlieffen was like, look, if we're going to knock out one group, okay, we need to try and contain this war to one front, right? How do we do that? Well, Arthur von Schlieffen's plan was to go over and throw 90% of the German military into France as fast as he possibly could, sweeping in, destroying and occupying Paris, and then focusing all of their army onto Russia, right? So the idea would be sweep in through Belgium, get after it, knock them out, and keep them out of the war so you didn't have to split your forces and you didn't have to fight a two-front war. And in reality, Germany was much more worried about the Imperial Russian army than they were the French one, when ironically enough, they should have been worried more about France than they should have been worried about Russia, because Russia still hasn't industrialized quite yet. But the big plan about it, or the big understanding about it, you got to ask yourself is, well, why did this fail, right? So why did the Schlieffen plan result in an ultimate failure. A lot of it involves Belgium, right? See Belgium right here? Well, Belgium at the time was a relatively brand new country. It had only existed since the late 1800s when they declared their independence from the Netherlands and became their own country, known as Belgium, right? So the thing about it is the Belgians were neutral in this conflict. And they said, we do not want to be swept into this argument. We're going to try and pull a Switzerland right now. We don't want to be in it. And Britain told Belgium, if the Germans step foot in your country, we'll declare war upon them, right? Well, the Belgians, in preparation for the Germans that possibly sweeping through their country, they blew up railroad tracks. They destroyed roads, and they slowed the German army down, right? So they slowed them down tremendously. The Germans passed into their borders, and the biggest thing about it is what ends up going down is also the Schlieffen Plan was changed. Arthur von Schlieffen's plan was to use 90% of the forces, but as the years went on following his death, the German military leaders were like, oh, we only need to use 85% really. Oh, we only really need to use 80% really, which was not a good idea. You should have stuck with the original 90. Belgium, like I said, blew up those train tracks, destroyed those roads, and the British told Germany, you touch Belgian soil, we're coming after you, right? Well, the British touched Belgian soil, got slowed down, and Britain declared war on Germany on August 6th. I was 2 days off. I said August 4th. All right, so now, August 6th on Germany after invading neutral Belgium, right? So that means that right now we've got a lot of places going down in this, right? We have two teams that are about to be fighting against each other, and what those two teams are the Central Powers and the Allies, right? Now, here's where things get confusing, okay? The Triple Alliance becomes the Central Powers, and the Triple Entente becomes the Allies, right? I know that's annoying, but I didn't make this up. Don't ask me why historians decided to call it this. But the Central Powers will consist of Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire, right? Now, the Allies is going to consist of Russia, France, Britain, and a bunch of other little guys, too. Now, you could talk all day you wanted to about the Central Powers, also including Bulgaria and a couple other little spots as well. You could talk all day if you wanted to about the Allies, also including Serbia and a couple other areas as well. But the big things you need to remember are the big groups, right? You got the big countries that are going to actually have the massive militaries capable of fighting this humongous war, right? Britain, France, Russia are the Allies, aka the Triple Entente. And Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Ottoman Empire are the Central Powers, aka the original Triple Alliance, right? Now, the interesting thing about it is in the original Triple Alliance, Italy was supposed to fight on the side of Germany, but they declared themselves neutral as well, and by the end of the war, we're actually going to switch to the Allies' side, right? And then on top of everything else is here comes the Ottomans when they join in October, okay? Then in October of 1914, a couple of months later, they join on the side of Germany so they can try to retain their trade goods in their area around the Black Sea without falling too hard, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is this war is going to get real intense real fast, and this right here is how this war started. Actually, an interesting little component of this is that writers during the 1900s, the early 1900s, said that Europe leapt fervently into war. They said that there were parades in the streets of Paris and Vienna celebrating this war. Look at these soldiers going off to war. Look how happy and excited they are because the uber nationalism of the era is overflowing, coupled with a massive amount of militarism, which is also giving credence to the pride in the military, swirling that in with nationalism, and so many of these people are going off because they are excited to go to this war. As you can see literally right here, these are German soldiers who have written German all over the sides of this boxcar saying that we are on our way to Paris, right? We are going after Paris. We're going to destroy it right there. And then literally, and the entire idea going into it is that these men were so happy, right? So happy to go off to war. But this war would claim 10 million lives. And this is how it actually went. It resulted in a disgusting stalemate trench war that absolutely left so many veterans blinded, battered, bruised, missing limbs, and some of them even missing their eyesight. This right here were the conditions that most of them were fighting in. Because what this war resulted in was what is known as trench warfare, right? And also total warfare. Total war is going to set in relatively early in the phases of this war. In the early 1900s, 1914 going into 1915 and 16, I know that, this war lasts from 1914 to 1918. Total war set in pretty quickly. Now, what a total war is a war in which distinction between the soldiers and the citizens is heavily blurred, and that all means of production is going to support the war effort itself. So basically, everything going on at home is to support the war, and everything going on in the war is trying to win the war. And literally, there is a very heavily blurred line between civilians in occupied territories and soldiers that you are fighting. So many Belgians died when the Germans swept through during the Schlieffen Plan, trying to actually take over the entire area because German soldiers shot and killed Belgian citizens, regular people, right? If you look at the grand total of this, over 1 million civilians died in this war because it reached such total war efforts, right? And then also on top of everything else, everything that was being made inside of each of these countries went to support the war effort. They were not to necessarily support anything else other than the war itself. If you made clothing before you made, before the war, you're now making uniforms to go to the military. But the better question is why the trenches? I'm sure a lot of y'all are like, okay, well, total war makes sense. They're industrialized nations. They leapt willingly into this war. They were getting after it. They could have avoided it, which was really dumb. But there's also new technology that's actually breaking out, which is going to actually create this new war effort. Well, the thing about it is that technology is also going to be the thing that leads to these trenches, right? So the trenches are going to result from this very first engagement between French soldiers and German soldiers, this battle known as the First Battle of the Marne. The Marne is a river. The Marne is a river that actually is right outside of Paris, a little bit to its northeast, right? And at the very first Battle of the Marne, you saw the debut of the fully automatic Maxim machine gun, right? The soldiers that went into this war were actually slowed down by this device because remember, it can fire 200 rounds per minute. So to get beneath the fire, instead of sitting and doing like this, these right here are Austrian and German soldiers at the First Battle of the Marne. As you can see, no trench has been dug yet, and they are behind a small hill embankment trying to use that as a way to keep themselves safe. Well, what ends up going down is the Germans and the Austrians get stalled out at the Battle of the Marne, and then they back up. They retreat several hundred yards, and they get out their entrenching tools, and they start digging foxholes and trenches to get beneath French machine gun fire. The French advance, the Germans use their machine guns against the French, and the French begin to dig their own trenches as well. And so we are now setting in to a stalemate type war, which will involve trench warfare, trying to get beneath this Maxim machine gun fire. Now, the interesting thing that actually results after that is this thing known as the race for the sea, right? So what ended up going down on the Western Front, notice what I'm talking about really quick. Most of the things I'm about to talk about are going to be on the Western Front. The Western Front, the front that actually happened in Germany and in France, because the Eastern Front's a little bit different. We're going to talk about that a lot in class. Well, the race for the sea basically began to be, when they started digging those trenches, they started digging them even longer because they kept trying to constantly outflank one another. They would dig this one a little longer and try to outflank the German trench. The Germans would dig theirs a little longer, try to outflank their trench. And it kept growing and growing and growing, like a crack in a piece of glass, right? If any of y'all have ever seen a crack in a windshield and how it just continued to grow, well, that's basically what happened with these trench networks. And the race for the sea resulted basically as they kept digging these trenches longer and longer. Once they hit water in the north, they had to start digging them southward. And there ended up, by the end of this war, being over 444 contiguous miles of trench, which is absolutely bananas. And if you look at it, you would have the French on this side, if this is the West, the Germans and their allies on this side, and right here is that ill-famed area known as no man's land, right? No man's land, the area that no man wants to go into, because if you do, you will surely die, right? Now, going into it as well, you need to understand that this is a massive difference between the Western and the Eastern Front. This is all going down mostly on the Western Front, because literally the soil is actually soft enough to dig these trenches in, whereas the Eastern Front was very, very frozen, and literally permafrost resulted in them not being able to dig trenches very deep, very quick, or very fast, right? Now, the elements of trench warfare that you need to also understand as well is that the early weapons are going to actually dictate the progression of the war. Early weapons in this war included rifles, breech-loading rifles, things like that, like the Dreiss needle gun we talked about, machine guns, artillery, and barbed wire. Now, the last two, artillery and barbed wire, are going to be two of the most important things we haven't discussed yet. What they are, though, is actually going to be their very large devices used to actually try and cause as much maximum damage as possible. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to wrap this flip up right here, and we're going to talk a lot about that weaponry and a lot about how this war was fought, and we're going to get into some Russia stuff in our next class, right? And we'll get to talk about our famous guy, Rasputin, in the next couple of classes, right? But I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. We're heading towards a test that we'll have when we get back from break, but it'll be either at the end of the week we get back or right at the beginning of the following one, because we don't have that much left, y'all. We're in 1914 right now. We only have to make it to the year 2000. So literally, we're just hucking our way down the road, and we're almost done, and we still got a month left. So we might even have some time for review, all right? So let's get after it. Keep crushing it. Keep studying. Start your study packet ideas or however you want to get ready for it. We'll talk about the elements of trench warfare and how this war was fought in our next class. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.